You're watching the Everything Network. The story of organized crime in Kansas City does not begin with gunfire or notoriety. It begins quietly, in the cramped and humid North End neighborhood during the early 1910s, when Sicilian immigrants carved lives by selling fruit, running small shops, and holding tight to the traditions of the old country. Among them were two brothers, Joseph Joe Church DiGiovanni and Peter Sugarhouse Pete DiGiovanni, men whose ambitions reached far beyond the immigrant markets they operated. Kansas City in the 1910s and 1920s was a political machine town. Tom Pendergast's Democratic Organization held the city like a puppeteer holds strings, controlling elections, municipal jobs, and police appointments. For the DiGiovanni brothers, this was an opportunity. Their small-time rackets, gambling dens tucked in basements, unlicensed liquor operations, and side deals with local merchants grew under the protective shadow of Pendergast's men. A quiet understanding developed. The DiGiovannis could prosper as long as they paid tribute, fixed votes when called upon, and kept their operations orderly. Prohibition struck like a bolt of lightning in 1920. What had been a modest criminal enterprise suddenly became an empire waiting to be built. Liquor was money, and Kansas City became one of the easiest places in America to get a drink. The DiGiovannis oversaw distribution networks that stretched across the city, with trucks carrying bootleg whiskey through streets policed by officers who knew exactly when to look the other way. Their power surged, but so too did the caliber of the men attracted to their orbit. Among those men was a young, sharply dressed figure named John Lazia. He was everything the DiGiovannis admired. Politically connected, charismatic, and fearless, Lazia understood that in Kansas City, the line between politics and the underworld was paper thin. He had begun with petty crimes, but moved swiftly into meaningful work, campaigning for political candidates, organizing precinct workers, and ensuring voter turnout at gunpoint when necessary. The Pendergast machine loved a man like that. By the late 1920s, Lazia had become the visible face of Kansas City's criminal underworld. His name was whispered in the alleyways of the North End and spoken with respect in the halls of City Hall. He owned a billiard parlor that served as both his social club and headquarters, a place where policemen, bookmakers, and bootleggers crossed paths over cigars and coffee. His wealth grew as bootleg alcohol poured through the city's nightclubs, brothels, and gambling halls. The DiGiovannis still held the reins, but Lazia was their star lieutenant, the man who made things happen. The 1930s brought tension. The Great Depression was eating at Kansas City just as it was devouring the rest of the country. Desperation breeds crime, and new independent operators started to challenge the DiGiovanni-Lazia structure. Violence became more frequent. Rival gangs attempted to muscle into bootlegging territory. But perhaps the most dangerous threat came not from outside, but from within. Lazia's boldness, his glamour, his visibility, began to unsettle older, more traditional members of the Sicilian structure. Organized crime, after all, had rules. It preferred shadows, not headlines. For a while, politics protected him, but federal officials, determined to break the Pendergast machine and the criminal networks under it, began to tighten their scrutiny. Then came July 10th, 1934. Lazia, returning home with his wife after a night out, encountered a team of gunmen who opened fire in front of his apartment building. He was hit several times and died hours later in a hospital bed. The killing shocked Kansas City. Some believed rival bootleggers had taken their revenge. Others whispered that Lazia's own associates had grown tired of his flamboyance and feared federal heat. Whatever the truth, Lazia's death left a power vacuum that would reshape the Kansas City underworld for decades. The mantle of leadership passed to Charlie the Wop Carollo. He was a quieter figure, a man more comfortable delegating tasks than meeting mayors. His style was old world, efficient, discreet, unremarkable. But the government had learned its lessons from watching Lazia. Carollo was soon targeted by federal tax investigations, and in 1939 he was convicted and imprisoned. That was when Charles Bonaggio stepped into the void. Bonaggio was unlike anyone Kansas City had seen. Born in Texas and raised in Kansas City, he possessed Lazia's political instincts, but added an ambition that bordered on dangerous. He saw organized crime not as a street-level racket, but as a tool to shape state politics. His speeches, when he chose to make them, were impassioned. His influence spread into the State House in Jefferson City, where he helped determine which candidates received support from the Pendergast machine and the underworld. Bonaggio's dream was unprecedented. He wanted a governor he could control. But political power is a double-edged sword. The more influence he wielded, the more scrutiny he attracted, from rivals, from police, and from national organized crime figures who feared he might stir too much attention. At his side stood Anthony Robert "Tony" Gizzo, a man whose nickname, Fat Tony, belied his calculating mind and hardened reputation. Gizzo had been a narcotics man in his younger years, tangled with federal drug charges, but had evolved into a respected figure among Kansas City's inner circle. Gizzo and Bonaggio were a formidable duo, one the visionary, the other the enforcer. Their partnership ended violently in 1950. On an April night, Bonaggio and his political ally Charles Gargotta were found shot to death inside the First Ward Democratic Club. Their bodies laid out as though in a mafia tableau, two men who had risen too high, too quickly, and who had pushed the wrong buttons. The murders sent shockwaves through national organized crime circles. Rumors circulated that the National Mafia Commission had sanctioned the hit due to Bonaggio's insubordination. Gizzo, left standing, quietly stepped forward. He was not flamboyant like Bonaggio, nor ambitious like Lazia. He represented a return to stability, a man who understood the unwritten laws of organized crime. For 3 years, he ran the Kansas City Syndicate. He restored order, rebuilt the gambling rackets, and re-established the family's connections with national mob figures. But his time, too, was short. In 1953, while visiting Dallas, he died of natural causes. Kansas City had cycled through flashy leaders, political kingmakers, and violent climbers. What it needed now was someone patient, cunning, and durable. It found that leader in Nicholas Civella. When Anthony "Fat Tony" Gizzo died in 1953 in a Dallas hotel room, the Kansas City underworld entered a moment of quiet uncertainty. For 4 decades, it had been shaped by strong personalities: Lazia with his political swagger, Bonaggio with his near-dictatorial political ambitions, and Gizzo with his stern discipline. Their deaths came like falling dominoes. The family needed someone who could unify factions, maintain the sophisticated political relationships nurtured under Pendergast, and modernize operations for a changing underworld. That someone was Nicholas Civella. Nick Civella did not look like a boss at first glance. He was reserved, soft-spoken, and rarely seen in the nightlife haunts that had been Lazia's domain. He preferred the quiet corners of clubs and the back rooms of trusted bars. But beneath his unassuming exterior lay a mind uniquely suited for the job. In a world where criminals often chased spotlight and ego, Civella chased longevity. Born in Kansas City to Sicilian immigrant parents, Civella had been immersed in the North End's networks from childhood. He wasn't a street brawler or a flashy gangster. He was a thinker and a strategist. His early arrests as a boy and teenager painted the image of a street tough, but those who knew him understood that he learned from every brush with the law. By the time he reached adulthood, he cultivated power quietly through party workers, union connections, bookmakers, and loan offices. His greatest strength was patience. Unlike his predecessors, he waited until Gizzo's death to truly assert control. But when he stepped forward, he brought something Kansas City had never fully possessed: unity. Under Civella, the Kansas City crime family transformed into a tightly organized structure. At the top stood the boss, Nick himself. His consigliere and underbosses included trusted men like Carl "Cork" Civella, his brother, James Tano Lococo, and associates from the older Lazia and Gizzo days. Enforcers such as the Camisano brothers, the fearsome, volatile Willie the Rat, and his sibling Joe, handled disputes with an efficiency the old bosses would have admired. The 1950s and 1960s became Kansas City's golden age of organized crime. With the Pendergast machine fading, the family built a new political empire of its own, using quiet bribes, union influence, and reciprocal favors with businessmen who enjoyed the benefits of mob-regulated gambling. The FBI, meanwhile, had not yet fully developed the methods that would one day cripple the mafia. The Kansas City family found itself with breathing room, and Civella used it to build something unprecedented. He set his sights on Las Vegas. Other families had already made inroads there: the Chicago outfit, the Cleveland family, and the Genovese and Gambino families from New York. But Civella saw something many others didn't. Kansas City's geographic position made it a perfect middle-country hub for skim networks. The city wasn't too big, wasn't too small, and had deep Teamsters union influence thanks to its long-standing political ties. The Teamsters were the key. The Central States Pension Fund, controlled by powerful union officers, had become a financial reservoir that mob families used to bankroll casinos. Loans were granted for construction, expansion, and operational costs. In return, mob families could install their own people inside casinos, allowing them to skim profits before the money ever appeared in official ledgers. Civella inserted Kansas City into this ecosystem with surgical precision. While he himself stayed largely in Kansas City, his emissaries, Tano Lococo, the Camisanos, and later his nephew Anthony Thomas, Tony Ripe Civella, began to oversee gambling interests in Las Vegas. Their focus centered on major casinos, the Tropicana, the Fremont, the Stardust, and others, where Teamster loans provided a foothold for criminal infiltration. The skimming was simple, elegant, and immensely profitable. Every day, before official counts were made, trusted employees removed stacks of cash from count rooms. That money was rolled up, tucked into envelopes or suitcases, and carried out by couriers who delivered it to mafia representatives. From there, the money traveled back to Kansas City through a chain of trusted hands and untraceable methods. It wasn't just money. The operations in Las Vegas linked Kansas City to large national players. Civella forged bonds with the Chicago outfit, the Cleveland family, and parts of New York's mafia. Kansas City, once a regional operation focused on bootlegging and gambling halls, now sat at the table with the most powerful criminal organizations in America. This expansion brought new wealth into Kansas City. Local bookmakers thrived. Illegal casinos, protected by police corruption and political favors, operated in basements, back rooms, and renovated warehouses. Loan sharking markets ballooned, filling the city with dozens of juice loan operations that ensnared gamblers, businessmen, and union workers alike. As new neighborhoods developed in Kansas City and its suburbs, mob-controlled construction companies moved in, skimming materials, using no-show laborers, and extracting payments from contractors needing insurance against theft or vandalism. But progress always brings attention. By the late 1960s, the federal government finally shifted its strategy against organized crime. The FBI, newly empowered by wiretap laws, began targeting leaders who operated behind closed doors, precisely the type Civella had become. Kansas City became a focus of long-standing FBI investigations, many of them aimed directly at Nick himself. The Bureau's first major break came from a mistake no one in the Kansas City underworld could have predicted: a simple phone call during the 1970 Super Bowl. Civella, a lifelong Kansas City Chiefs fan, had placed substantial bets on the game. The FBI, already monitoring certain phone lines, captured a series of calls involving him discussing gambling. The calls provided evidence of illegal gambling operations, but, more importantly, served as a gateway into understanding how Civella communicated, whom he called, and how the organization managed its affairs. The federal government began tightening its grip. In 1977, Sevilla was convicted of illegal gambling charges stemming from those wiretaps. The conviction, though not massive compared to what other bosses around the country had faced, signaled a turning point. The FBI had successfully penetrated Kansas City's secrecy. This emboldened prosecutors and sent tremors through the family's upper ranks. But Sevilla remained undeterred. From prison, he maintained communication with his brother Carl, his nephew Anthony, and trusted figures like Willie Camazano. The family continued its business, almost uninterrupted. They had weathered storms before. This one seemed no different. However, the government was just getting started. In 1980, yet another blow landed when Sevilla was convicted for attempting to bribe a prison official to secure better conditions for his nephew Anthony. This offense, combined with the earlier conviction, painted a picture of a boss whose influence remained strong, but whose environment had changed dramatically. The family's biggest crisis, though, was brewing thousands of miles away in Las Vegas. Federal investigators had begun examining financial discrepancies in casino revenue reports. Some countroom workers, intimidated by the constant pressure of skimming, had whispered to law enforcement about envelopes of money leaving the casino floor. Surveillance footage, accounting anomalies, and multiple informants eventually provided the FBI with enough ammunition to target the skimming operations. Kansas City was caught in the dragnet. The skim involved not only the Sevillas, but partners from Chicago, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. Federal indictments swept across the country. In 1984, Carl Cork Sevilla and Anthony Tony Ripe Sevilla were convicted in the Las Vegas skimming case, dealing a crushing blow to Kansas City's reach. With Nick already ailing in federal custody, his lungs ravaged by cancer, his body weakened, Kansas City's golden era ended. On March 12, 1983, Nicholas Sevilla died. For the first time in 3 decades, the family faced a world without its master strategist. Yet even in death, Sevilla had changed Kansas City forever. He had expanded a neighborhood operation into a national player. He had balanced violence with diplomacy, politics with crime, and ambition with discipline. His passing marked the end of a dynasty, but the organization did not crumble. The machinery he built endured. Leadership passed to his brother Carl until his imprisonment, and then into the hands of men like William "Willie the Rat" Camazano, an enforcer who had survived years of mob wars, bombings, and federal scrutiny. Camazano's tenure was not as glamorous as Sevilla's, but it was defined by resolve. He kept the family afloat during a period of intense federal pressure, internal strain, and changing criminal markets. The decline of the Kansas City crime family did not arrive in a single moment of collapse. It came in slow waves: indictments, aging leaders, changing criminal markets, and the dissolution of the old world networks that had once protected the organization. Yet even as the family weakened, it never disappeared. It adjusted, regrouped, and in typical Kansas City fashion, maintained a stubborn foothold in the city's underworld. The first major tremors of the family's decline had already begun in the 1970s. While Nick Sevilla masterminded the Las Vegas skim, a parallel conflict erupted closer to home, one that would illustrate both the power and the volatility of the Kansas City Mafia. It began in the River Quay, an old industrial district along the Missouri River. In the 1970s, city planners and private investors saw potential in the area. They envisioned restaurants, bars, clubs, and boutique shops lining the restored riverfront, drawing in tourists and revitalizing Kansas City's downtown. But the Mafia had its own plans. The Camazano brothers, Willie and Joe, believed River Quay should become a red light and gambling district under their control. To them, the area's redevelopment offered a perfect opportunity to embed strip clubs, underground casinos, and prostitution rings in the city's entertainment scene. Their vision clashed violently with legitimate business owners who wanted River Quay to represent a polished, modern Kansas City. Tension escalated into intimidation. Intimidation became extortion. extortion became violence. Bombings rocked the district. Nightclubs and bars aligned with the Camisano's rivals were destroyed in late-night explosions. Business owners reported threats, break-ins, and shadowy figures stalking their establishments. Kansas City, long accustomed to quiet corruption, had not seen public violence on this scale in decades. The destruction of the River Quay district was one of the most damaging long-term blows to the Civella family's reputation. The violence drew intense federal scrutiny and fractured the delicate balance Kansas City's mob had maintained with local institutions for years. It was a brutal reminder that even well-organized crime syndicates can be undone when ambition overtakes discipline. By the early 1980s, with the River Quay in ruins and the Las Vegas skim exposed, the Kansas City Mafia entered a period of uncertainty. When Nick Civella died in 1983 and his brother Carl Cork was convicted in the casino skim case the next year, the family's leadership structure was decimated. For a moment, the organization felt like a ship without a captain, rocked by legal storms and unable to find its direction. It was during this turbulent period that William "Willie the Rat" Camisano assumed leadership. Willie was not a strategist like Civella, nor a diplomat like Gizzo. He was, above all else, an enforcer, tough, uncompromising, and feared. He had risen through decades of loyalty to the Civellas and had survived countless mob wars and federal investigations. His reputation for ruthlessness made him both respected and feared, which was exactly what the family needed during its darkest hours. Under Willie, the family shifted focus. Gone were the grand national operations of the Civella era. Instead, the family concentrated on its traditional rackets, loan sharking, gambling, extortion, and control over adult entertainment venues. The scale was reduced, the profits smaller, but the operations were reliable. Willie kept the organization alive by relying on the old methods: intimidation, loyalty, and local influence. But time, as always, was the enemy. Willie grew older, and law enforcement pressure never relented. In the years leading up to his death in 1995, the organization became more cautious, more fragmented, and less visible. Leadership then fell to the next generation. Anthony Thomas "Tony Ripe" Civella, the nephew of Nick Civella and son of Carl Cork Civella. Tony had spent years in prison for his role in the Las Vegas skim. During that time, Willie the Rat had acted as caretaker of the family. When Tony was released, he resumed a leadership position, though the world he returned to was much different from the one he had known. By the 1990s, Kansas City was no longer a mob town. The old alliances with unions, contractors, and politicians had weakened. The heyday of clandestine gambling dens and bribed police captains had dissolved. Yet Tony managed to hold the family together through personal influence, family loyalty, and the remnants of the old structure. He operated with subtlety, avoiding flash, making decisions through trusted intermediaries. Even so, the government continued to watch closely. The organization remained active in illegal gambling and loan sharking, and the federal government pursued indictments whenever possible. Tony's death in 2006 marked the end of an era. The last decades of the Civella family's direct leadership by Nick's bloodline. With him gone, the Kansas City Mafia transitioned into something new, smaller, quieter, and more survivalist than ever before. But it did not disappear. In the early 2000s, younger members of the Camisano and Civella families resurfaced in federal investigations. These were not the large-scale operations of old. Instead, the indictments centered on online gambling enterprises, sports betting networks, and modernized loan operations. The criminal markets had changed. The Kansas City family changed with them. One high-profile case involved members of the Camisano family orchestrating a multi-million-dollar internet sports betting operation. Online platforms replaced the bookie notebooks of old. Offshore servers replaced smoky backrooms. Yet the basic mechanics, debt, payment collection, intimidation, remained the same. Another notable name was Vincent Civella, the son of Anthony. He appeared in cases involving smaller-scale gambling operations and extortion tactics. While he never held the stature of his father or great-uncle, he represented the lingering spark of the once powerful Civella dynasty. The modern Kansas City crime family, as whispered among investigators and underworld watchers, is a shadow of its former self. Yet it persists. Its structure is said to mirror the old ways, though with far fewer members. The boss is believed to be Johnny Joe Ciortino, the godson of Anthony Civella, a man raised in the tradition of the old organization, but operating in a completely different world. Beside him are aging remnants of the old guard and a few younger associates who grew up hearing stories of the family's former power. Their operations today are narrow: sports betting, online gambling, loan sharking, control over certain adult venues, and light extortion. No Las Vegas casinos, no political machines, no grand rackets that place Kansas City at the center of national criminal operations. Yet the family has something remarkable: longevity. Many mafia families across the United States have collapsed completely. Boston's Patriarca family fractured, the Tampa family dissolved, Los Angeles faded into obscurity. Kansas City, despite its size and distance from traditional mafia strongholds, survived more than a century. It survived prohibition, it survived political reform, it survived leaders being assassinated, imprisoned, or disgraced. It survived the death of Nick Civella, the collapse of the River Quay, and the exposure of its Las Vegas empire. It even survived the internet age, adapting its gambling operations for a digital world. If the Kansas City Mafia has a defining characteristic, it is endurance. Today, the family exists as a quiet echo of what it once was. A handful of made members, a few dozen associates, some working-class neighborhoods that remember the old names, a few bars and businesses where whispers still circulate about who belongs to whom. The fear once associated with names like Civella, Camisano, and Lococo has faded, but within the family's internal circles, those names still command respect. Those who study the Kansas City underworld often wonder whether the organization will die with its last aging members, or whether younger generations will carry the torch. The answer, as always with Kansas City, remains hidden behind closed doors, in quiet conversations among trusted men who rarely speak to outsiders. What is undeniable is this: the Kansas City crime family shaped the city for a century. It influenced politics, business, unions, and entire communities. It produced leaders as cunning as Nick Civella, as ambitious as Charles Bernagio, as ruthless as Willie the Rat, and as politically slick as John Lazia.